podcast. I'm your host, Will, and I'm with the ever-present, always shirt-wearing, and always pants-wearing, Eric.
Yeah, it's tank top season here on the East Coast. It's 94 degrees today in
Oh
our
my god.
beautiful Vienna, Virginia, Little Ends HQ.
HQ.
So, it's tank top season for me.
Yeah, it is.
You know?
It is.
When the calendar flips to June, the sleeves come off.
Yeah, that's right. Right. No guns, though, right?
No.
Yeah, of course not.
Yeah. I'm not quite in my peak physical form.
No, I meant like real guns.
Oh,
Yeah.
no real guns.
This is a gun-free household.
Yes, that's
Yeah,
correct.
of course.
Yeah.
So what are we doing today?
We are introducing Season 9, Will. I think starting in Season 8 and now continuing into future seasons, we're going to be doing these little short intro episodes where we tell you, fine listeners, the 4 or 5 adaptations we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Get you excited for the season, let you get your reading going.
Yep.
Find these movies, just like, key in on what we're looking at.
Yeah, if you see anything that you like, that you want to read and you want to watch, like, feel free to join us on this journey that we're going on. We're going to be reading and watching 4 adaptations. And what is the season theme? The season
Season 9,
idea?
The Beats.
The beets.
The Beats, yeah.
Not the vegetable, right?
Not the vegetable, B-E-A-T.
Is it vegetable or fruit?
I think a beet's a vegetable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure.
We're doing the beats. We haven't recorded in a little while because I got married. I went on my honeymoon.
Mm-hmm.
We were vaxxed and ready to hit the road, maybe.
Yes, you did.
And one of the places we visited actually was San Francisco. And in San Francisco, we went to this place called the City Lights Bookstore.
Okay.
A famous beat bookstore.
Oh.
Ran and operated by this guy, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who was a poet and one of the original beat generation boys. I think most of the ones you'll read about are men, although there were several women involved as well,
Mm-hmm.
just with less notoriety. But I went there. They had this whole beat section. We were reading on the road for a different iteration of what Season 9 could have been,
Yeah.
and we sort of just decided, like, there's this whole generation of writers who were sort of like proto-hippies. They were a little bit counterculture. They wrote about drug use and sex, and their narratives weren't like traditional. The form of, like, their writing wasn't traditional. It wasn't a traditional novel. Wasn't traditional, like, poetry. They wrote a little bit differently, and they sort of have been. I don't know if they've been lost to time, but like a couple of them have survived, but the rest of them have sort of floated off into the ether.
Mm-hmm.
They were sort of the pre-hippies, and then the hippies became more of a like cultural mainstay, and the beats sort of fell off.
You know how I like to think of them? The hipster hippies.
The hipster hippies.
They were
first.
They were the first ones, and they were cool before the hippies went mainstream.
And they're probably okay with like being lost to time,
Yeah,
It's probably where they wanted to be.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, City Lights, really cool bookstore. You should check it out if you go to San Fran. But sort of like the HQ of the beat scene.
That's very cool. I didn't know that. So, is it a big bookstore, pretty small?
I would say it's
What's the vibe like?
a decent size. It's not a massive bookstore.
Is
but
it
it's
like
not teeny tiny?
Used or new books?
Both.
Both.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's right next to Chinatown in San Francisco. Across the street, there's a beat museum.
Okay.
So that I think that they kind of know, like, that they're notorious for a specific reason.
Gotcha.
But you walk in, there's 2 stories. The second story is all beat stuff. So
Oh,
like
wow.
any Jack Kerouac book you could want, any Lawrence Ferlinghetti poetry collection you could want.
Wild.
Upstairs, yeah. Lawrence Ferlinghetti died last year.
Oh,
He
really?
was like 90. He was old. He was up there like 95, 96. Wow. So one of the last beats, finally, the beat stopped for him.
So he was the last one.
Yeah. Because this was a movement, I think, popularized in the late 40s, across the 50s, and probably into the 60s a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And City Lights, I think, was started in the 50s.
Wow. So it's been around a while.
Yeah.
I mean, this bookstore specifically. So
Yeah.
it didn't pop up like later on, like in the 80s. It was just like a totem to the beat. It was like the original.
Yeah, and I think that's a gathering ground for a lot of these guys. Jack Kerouac, I think, famously used San Francisco as a playground.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these guys
Right.
Came to San Francisco, did their wild, crazy shit,
Yeah.
and moved on.
Which we'll find out about.
Yeah, I think the beats formed out of Columbia University. I think a lot of the main guys and gals were students there, and they all met there.
Okay.
And then they had this diaspora across
It just
the groaning continent, if you've ever read On the Road.
wreaked havoc on the rest of the United States.
Yeah, just like doing drugs, having free love.
Yeah.
Not using traditional 3-act structures and such.
If you could compare this generation of writers to like a modern generation of like people who is there something comparable maybe?
I was trying to think about that when we were talking to Mary, my wife, about this like earlier, and the only thing I could think of is the Brat Pack, the like 80s young movie star kind of people.
Yeah.
And it's not a one-for-one comparison, but to think that like everybody who wrote a book in the 50s from New York maybe could fit into a generation like this who was sort of writing like wild, loose stuff.
Right.
And like kind of like every young actor in the 80s who was in The Outsiders was, in the Brat Pack.
What about today's TikTokers? Could you compare
I don't think
the
I
two?
can name today's TikToker. I don't think I can name anybody.
I don't think I could. Well, no, I don't think I could either if I thought about it. But they are very popular. They make content, art, maybe per se, and they live together. I think they have like TikTok houses.
Yeah.
So they're surely wreaking havoc, and I'm sure some of them are at least doing drugs.
But I feel like the kids don't do drugs anymore.
Is that over with? Is that like not? Is it cool to not do drugs?
I think it is. I think they like don't drink, they don't do drugs, they don't have sex, and that's just like the generation.
Wow, what a horrible generation.
Yeah, they're like, they have different concerns, right? They're thinking more long term, and that's not how you're supposed to think.
Yeah, why would you do that?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, right? Like these guys, these beats, they didn't think long term.
Yeah.
They were like, we're gonna do some methadone and just like little drips and see what happens tonight. I'm gonna drink 75 beers and then drive home.
Yeah,
that's
that was accepted.
Yeah. All these guys died of like liver disease. So
yeah, we don't recommend doing that now, by the way.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of hard to compare them to anybody else because it was just such a weird time in America where it was like pre-development of a lot of things. There were still like places in the country that weren't filled in, and you could have adventures like you couldn't have today. Like I suppose you could just go to San Francisco today, but you could go on YouTube and find a million videos telling you what to do in San Francisco. There's all these places that are already discovered for you and like curated for you to do.
That's true. That's a good point. And then at this time, you just had to go and find shit to do, basically. Find people to hang out with and just do random drugs and do random shit.
Yeah. I feel like these people had no plans. They were like, we're just gonna they keep saying this in On the Road. That's what spoiler alert.
Right.
But they're just like, let's just like dig the night, let's just like see what happens. And whatever happens is like, that's right.
Right. Yeah. As it should be.
So that's the beats, man.
Okay. So, and this is our season, and that's kind of like sort of why we're doing it. But like, can you talk more about who are the beats? Give us more historical context and background, and maybe who are some of them? Why are we doing it? And what does beat mean?
Well, I think I'm no beat expert. Certainly, when you talk about big beat names, it's Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, certainly. William S. Burroughs. And you'll see in our list that we're hitting a lot of the major ones.
Right.
But, New York to wherever in the country, this was a group of people, like, just, they didn't follow the rules.
Right.
They were doing drugs, they were, like, having sex, and they were writing about it. And I think one of the big beat tenets is exploration, travel, trying to see things and trying to understand life by changing their like zip code. They were going to California, they were going to Mexico, they were going to Africa, and they were just like doing whatever it was there to help them understand what was happening.
Right.
And there was a lot of drugs. Obviously, this was the 50s and 60s, and that's just sort of what happened to creative people.
Right.
But I think it's just like, On the Road in particular is famous for being written in like one long scroll kind of thing, where I think he just sat down and like wrote, and that's just sort of what we ended up reading. It wasn't prescribed. It wasn't like, there was no outline.
Right.
He just did it, and he he wrote about his friends and he fictionalized them, but they're pretty like thinly veiled
Right.
fictions. So you know that Carlo Marx is Allen Ginsberg. You know that Old Bully is William S. Burroughs. And
Right.
I think if those guys reading Jack Kerouac's work are like, fuck, like
Right.
this is me, and you're actually writing about me. I think it's a lot of not quite like auto fiction, but like this is my life. I've lived this life. Sort of like the what you think Hemingway is, where like Hemingway, went to bullfights and he's writing about bullfighting.
Right.
And he's like, oh, this is the Hemingway bullfight story. Like Hemingway did that.
Right.
That not so true. Like Hemingway, more of like a mythic person who maybe used his real life to influence some of his stories, but not like 100%.
Right.
Whereas I think the Beats more or less like
it's almost like a diary entry, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Like this is what happened. This is actually what we did.
Yeah, they were
This is
very
what they said to me.
experiential.
Mm.
Like I did this shit. I'm gonna write about it, and
Right.
maybe I won't put Allen Ginsberg's name on it.
Right.
But
To save him.
it was him, and we know it.
We all know.
Yeah.
Interesting. So it's funny that this sort of style of prose or style of writing developed out of this time, and this is post World War II, and you have all these people sort of exploring America again. You have this sort of pride in the United States, and moving out west. Obviously, the gold rush was like 100 years before that, but you kind of have this second sort of wave of people moving west and exploring the rest of the country. And it's cool that we have these writers who wrote this way, this sort of diary-esque way of writing, and sort of splurge all your thoughts into one stream of consciousness right onto the page. But what are we doing first? What's the book? What's the adaptation we're doing?
So, I think if you did a beat season and didn't include On the Road, you could legally face jail time.
Yeah,
I think that's what the rule is.
Confirmed, yes.
I mean, it's the beat book On the Road. You read it in high school, you read it in college. We've been rewatching The OC. I've been watching it for the first time, and two of the main characters in that show, their favorite book is On the Road.
Is that right?
On the Road is everywhere. It's
oh
like
my God.
I probably top 5 famous American novel.
Probably.
Right? For good and ill, I suppose. I think there's a lot today about rewriting some of the canon.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when you think American novels, at least modern ones, like you might start with On the Road.
Yeah, probably.
And I'm like 90% of the way done with this. So this is our first episode of this season.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like 90% done. You're a quarter of the way in,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it could fit in a lot of different seasons. Like to me, it feels pretty unadaptable.
Right. Yeah.
It's got some places, like some scene setting that could fit a different season as well.
Right.
But I think it's for any beat season, this is the keystone.
Right.
Um,
So give me the synopsis real quick.
Yeah, a young writer, Sal Paradise, has his life shaken by the arrival of free-spirited Dean Moriarty and his wife, Mary Lou.
Mm-hmm.
As they travel across the country, they encounter a mix of people who each impact their journey indelibly.
Wow, I like that word, by the way, indelibly.
Indelibly,
It
yeah.
sounds nice. It sounds almost like a name.
Indelibly, yeah. Book was written in 1957, and the movie came out in 2012. And
Yep.
it's like a powerhouse of a movie. Like,
Cast-wise.
wasn't aware of this movie at the time, but
Yeah.
directed by Walter Sales, starring Sam Riley, who's the least famous person in the cast.
Yeah.
It also includes Garrett Hedlund, Kristen Stewart, Amy Adams, Kirsten Dunst, Viggo Mortensen. Like, everybody's in this movie. Where was this movie?
Who was the chick from the Hulu show, Handmaid's Tale?
Oh, Elizabeth Moss.
Yeah, she's in this
It's
as
here
well.
too. Yeah, so every single person that you've ever heard of in your life is in this movie.
Yeah, even us were in it.
And I'm in it too.
Yeah.
And you're, and you can find it online. I think you gotta rent or buy it.
I honestly don't remember this coming out.
I don't either. It seems sort of indie.
Yeah, it does seem indie. Yeah, and I don't know. It just didn't get any buzz. No Oscar buzz, obviously. No other award buzz, but killer cast. I mean, I guess that makes sense. It's such a famous book. You're probably going to attract a lot of interest from top actors. Granted, at this time, the most famous person was probably Kristen Stewart, I want to say. Amy Adams wasn't really that famous at the time. Garrett Hedlund was kind of bubbling up.
It's weird because the book, I mean, like, the showy part is Dean Moriarty, right?
Right.
And I don't even know, like, when I meant that On the Road could fit in different seasons, like, it could fit in an unadaptable season.
Definitely.
Because nothing really happens except for they just, like, drive around the country and, like, get their kicks,
Right.
They dig people. They drive drunk. They go to bars. They get like kicked out of bars. They wake up hungover. They like do it all again.
Yeah.
And that's it. There's nothing. There's no real plot.
Well, you still have 10% to read. So
yeah, maybe the ending will be different.
Yeah.
It's sort of weird too. Like Kristen Stewart is playing Mary Lou, who's really not that big of a part of the book. And
she's a big actress.
But she's the biggest actress.
Right.
But she has a part that probably will. We haven't seen the movie yet, but like, it'll be a weird adaptation.
Yeah. So we're doing that. Look for that episode next week, which is where we're gonna record next Sunday. And then you can rent or buy online. I think it's available just for Amazon. That. Yeah.
So what's number 2?
Number 2 is Howl, which was written in 1956. The adaptation was filmed in 2010. And as Allen Ginsberg talks about his life and art, his most famous poem is illustrated in animation, while the obscenity... Is that right? The obscenity trial of the work is dramatized. So it's not necessarily about the book exactly, but it's sort of about the trial of the book afterwards, which I'm not really sure of all the details, but I'm sure we'll find out.
I'm not either. I know that... I think one of the reasons to pick this one is because, as we talk about the Beat generation being sort of like anti-mainstream, anti-rule, little sexual, little like illicit in the drug use, you can sort of understand that like people would be threatened by that during the 50s and 60s. Even like, you know, American culture at large faced a lot of changes. I think we've talked about this in episodes past, right? Like 60s were a very turbulent decade. You can understand why a group of young people writing like crazy shit would make a lot of other people uncomfortable.
Upset, yeah.
So I think from a high level understanding of what the Beats did, I think Howell, the movie, could be an interesting example of like what their impact was.
Yeah, it shows the societal impact of the Beat generation.
Yeah. And there's like a lot of scholarship around these beats. Like when we looked into adaptations, shockingly not a lot of these works have been adapted.
Yeah.
And On the Road, for being like such a famous book, only got adapted in 2012.
Right.
That was like 70 years later, 60 years later.
Yeah, we should eventually. We'll do more on the episode. I'm sure it like is one of those scripts that was probably passed around in Hollywood for a number of years, maybe decades, just like never got made until then. But it's directed by Rob Epstein, unconfirmed any relation to the deceased Jeffrey Epstein. Also directed by Jeffrey Friedman, starring James Franco, canceled Todd Rotundi, and John Prescott.
Yeah,
These are some
but
weird people.
David Strathairn's in this.
David Strathairn,
John Hamm is in this.
Yep.
The woman from Weeds.
Oh, Mary Louise Parker.
Yeah, Mary Louise Parker.
And then Rent or Buy Online. So that's number 2. And then what is number 3?
Number 3, Big Sur. This was written in 1962, adapted in 2013. Hollywood was on a Jack Kerouac adaptation spree. 2012, On the Road, 2013, Big Sur. The story here is a recounting of the author Jack Kerouac's 3 sojourns to the cabin in Big Sur, owned by his friend, the poet Lawrence Ferlinghetti. Of City Lights fame. I really don't know what this is about, honestly. Other than, you know how the internet sometimes will be like, they'll take something that is so mainstream, like On the Road. You would assume that On the Road is probably the best Jack Kerouac book because it's the one best remembered.
Right.
And they're like, you know what's actually the best Jack Kerouac book? Big Sur.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, you know who's actually the best like bull from the 1990s? Scottie Pippen. Like, this sort of like the way the internet bullshits you into like, oh, it's the thing you think is true is actually not true.
Yeah, it's like those art kids who actually read the book in college were like, actually this one's my favorite, so I think it's the best.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, you go ahead and read On the Road
as they wear their Carhartt hoodies or their whatever.
Yeah,
hoodies.
so that's sort of my relationship with Big Sur. I know of it because the internet thinks it's a little bit better.
Right.
On our honeymoon, we actually drove through Big Sur, and I was like, I'm pretty sure there's a Jack Kerouac book about this. And there is. And there's a movie about it, 2013, directed by Michael Polish.
That's probably right.
Starring Jean-Marc Barr, Kate Bosworth, and Josh Lucas.
I think it's Jean-Marc.
Jean-Marc.
Not Jean-Marc. You American swine.
Well, yes, that's fair. Jean-Marc Barr. And this is also a rent or buy online situation. But we watched the trailer before we recorded. It looks pretty interesting.
Yeah. You can't really tell what's happening. It looks like there might be like a love triangle situation going on with like Kate Bosworth and the other actors, but other than that, they're just like in Big Sur and like looks like it's beautifully shot. And other than that, I'm not really sure.
If you want some good photography, I'm sure this movie will have a lot of
it. For sure.
Again, not a lot of beat adaptations. I don't know what's up with that, other than maybe just like the world doesn't really like them anymore.
Yeah, I mean, all the traditionalists are still suppressing this form of artistry, which is tough.
Amen, brother.
And then number 4, we have Naked Lunch, which is another perennial beat book, written in 1959, adapted in 1991. Synopsis: after developing an addiction to the substance abuse he uses to kill bugs, an exterminator accidentally kills his wife and becomes involved in a secret government plot being orchestrated by giant bugs in a port town in North Africa. Holy shit, this sounds crazy.
Can you imagine if this was like a fake summary I put in here just to have you read?
Did you do that?
No, this is real.
So I was like, wait a minute. Yeah, I mean, honestly, it doesn't sound like a real story. I mean, it sounds crazy. But why are we doing this one?
This is another classic. I mean, when you literally go on the Wikipedia for the Beat Generation, they list On the Road, Howl, and Naked Lunch. 59, so a little bit after On the Road, I guess by 2 years. But it's a classic. I think in my mind, it's one of Anthony Bourdain's favorites. That's how I first heard about it.
Oh, okay.
When we talk about drug use, obviously this will be the big drug use book.
Okay, good.
I think this person, William S. Burroughs, who wrote it, had a severe drug problem.
Oh, really?
So, you know.
That's always good.
If you want to read a book about somebody who had a severe drug problem,
this is the one.
Might you be interested in Naked Lunch? Is that something you might be interested in?
Yeah, definitely interested in that. So it's directed by David Cronenberg, starring Peter Weller, Judy David, and Ian Holm.
Yeah,
and then
Bilbo Baggins.
Is that him, the same guy?
I think so.
And then rendered by online. So none of these are streaming, which is kind of, the capitalism does not like the beatnik generation.
It is weird. None of these are very mainstream.
Yeah.
But, the Beats, were they mainstream?
I guess they're original hipsters, so.
It feels like we could go for a new Hollywood adaptation of On the Road.
Definitely. Of all these.
It used to be back in the day that like studios would just buy up books and adapt them. Like,
yeah.
All of the major Hemingways were adapted in the 50s and 60s, like immediately. Probably some of the Fitzgeralds, a lot of Faulkners were adapted early on. It's weird.
Yeah, it is weird. I mean, it might be interesting to get in the conversation with Hal because when we watched the trailer, it looked like there was a scene where one of the ladies was criticizing the book because it wasn't considered literary or literature, essentially.
Yeah.
So maybe that's part of it. Like maybe they think, no, we have to adapt literature because this is an art form.
Yes, and it's just all the style of writing is just not meant for Hollywood.
Yeah, I mean, the first one was adapted. Of these options, the first one was adapted in 1991. Shout out our birth year.
Yeah, that's true.
And then, 2010, 2012, 2013. So.
And it is a David Cronenberg movie, this Naked Lunch, and he feels like kind of weird, right?
Yeah.
So maybe it needs to take somebody weird to adapt something weird.
Yeah. We'll see how good it is. That'll be number 4. And then in between our season, we're going to be doing The Green Knight, which is coming out at the end of July.
Yep. Starring Dev Patel.
And then the poem, I guess, is called Sir Gawain and the Green Knight.
Sir Gawain.
Gawain, excuse me. Sorry. And that is available for PDF online. You can just Google it and you'll find it.
Yeah. You could probably read it in old English, or I'm sure there are like modern translations like you find of Shakespeare.
I hope so.
Now. Yeah.
I really hope so. Really hated Shakespeare in high school.
I took a whole medieval lit class at UEA, and this was one of the books on the reading list. But that was a tough, like, niche class.
Yeah, I would never. You couldn't pay me to do that class.
Yeah.
Do you remember reading this one, this poem?
Yeah.
What do you remember anything from it? Like, do you remember? Was it good? Was it bad?
It was good. It's a pretty simple story where this knight gets quested to go kill the Green Knight, just like this giant, kind of like evil person on the outskirts of like some sort of town.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like imagine like someone going off to slay a dragon or something like that.
Okay.
But just like a big knight. And so he goes and does the deed.
Oh, spoilers.
He attempts to do the deed.
The trailer looks dope though.
The trailer does look really good.
Yeah.
Another A24 joint.
Yeah, they're killing it.
We tried to create a season around that, That was difficult.
Just impossible.
Yeah.
Unless we do like Hamlet or something ridiculous.
Yeah, I was looking into more medieval lit too. Some of those are hard to find online,
Yeah.
and some of them that you can find online are like unreadable.
Yeah, I mean,
Like I looked into Braveheart. This is probably too much for our listeners, but I peeked behind the curtains. I looked into because Braveheart is based on
the book
yeah, there's
or something.
another poem about William Wallace,
Oh, okay.
but it's written in like Scottish.
Yeah, no thanks.
And I couldn't find a translation in English.
Yeah, we're into this, but we're not that into it. Like we're not going down that path.
No,
At least I won't.
I'm not.
You're more than welcome.
Yeah, I can't read it. I can't read Scottish.
Yeah. So be on the lookout for these 4 coming up this season. We'll plan to sort of finish out the season probably early to mid-August, just to give you guys a time frame how we're doing it. And obviously we'll post more on social media as we go along, and we have solidified dates. But look out for On the Road next weekend, which should be, what is today? Today we are recording this Sunday, June 6th, so the 13th was probably when we'll record it. So look for it that week right after. And then we'll just kind of keep chugging along, keep going. So this should be an interesting season. We kind of decided this maybe an hour or so ago. But it should be good. I'm excited.
Yeah, and we'll do a little bit more beat research as we go along and give you some more context, like in those particular episodes as well.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot to learn about these people.
Yeah.
Beyond like our little intro episodes.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I always kind of heard about this Beat Generation thing, but I never really knew much about it. I was aware of Jack Kerouac, but didn't really know much about him. But now I feel like we're delving into the hipster, like, cave here.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like we should read a little bit more than just these 4 books too. Like there's a couple of poetry collections.
Yeah.
And yeah, the thing is like there just weren't a lot of these adapted, although there was a lot of output by these people.
Definitely.
Like, so if you don't like white men writers, we are sorry because we looked for other adaptations and there just weren't any.
So.
But we'll read some other folks for the season as well and talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that's it for today's episode, for this season intro. Check out our latest episode, interview with Lane Shifter Bishop, which is available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to rate and review us and tell one friend. That's it. Just tell them. You don't have to do any other thing.
Can I tell you or
no?
Okay.
We're not friends.
We're hosts.
Yeah.
You're my co-host.
Yeah. And then make sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at lit2lens. Find us on the blog, lit2lensblog.wordpress.com. And then see you next week when we talk about On the Road by Jack Kerouac.
Yeah, you missed it in high school? Read it now.
Read it now.